What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Meta Design. In this episode, we're going to learn about color correction. How do we change colors? How do we make things brighter? How do we rotate colors? How do we replace colors? We're going to learn a little more, and then we're also going to learn how to do adjustments and things like that. So, in this episode, let's get started. So, I'm just going to go to File. I'm going to click on Open, and I'm going to open our picture of the Harley. Okay. So I'm going to unlock this image as usual. We don't need to do that in this episode, but I'm just going to show you. Now, there are a lot of things we can do. And these things, when we do things with colors, we can just do it in two ways. Either we can do it destructively, which is I can change the colors right on this image as we speak, or I can do it on a different layer. But the problem with doing it on a different layer is the fact that you need to have multiple layers. There's no point of this layer anymore. So a destructive way to do things would be to actually change the colors on this layer. So let's try that, right? Let's go to adjustments and let's change a little bit, right? Let's change the hues a little bit, right? So we click on hue and saturation and we just rotate things around. And as you can see, the colors change as you'd expect. So we can make it pink, we can make it blue, and you have to understand what it's doing here, right? The hue is the actual shade of color. So you can actually change things from blue to green to red to whatnot. It's the actual hue of the color. The saturation is the amount of color in it, right? So if I remove the saturation completely, it becomes a black and white image. But if I put back in the saturation, if I turn it up, it becomes extremely bright, right? It adds blues everywhere. So it becomes a very deep shade of blue. And the lightness is how bright or dark it is, right? You can just make it completely black or you can make it very, very bright. We're just going to turn the lightness back to 0. Right? So this allows us to, play with the different kind of colors. And the minute I press on OK, as you can see, the original image or the original layer is gone, right? We've done things destructively and we're going to try to avoid to do things destructively. So let's undo this. That's Control Z. And in the past, what I used to do was I'd just make a duplicate of the layer, right? I'd right click, I click on duplicate layer. That makes a copy of the layer, the entire layer. And I'd make my adjustments on the layer above. So the shortcut for hue and saturation is Control plus U instead of me going into the menu. And, I'd edit it like this and be like, yeah, in case I screw up this, I can always go back to the base layer. So I'm going to make this layer visible again. All right. So that changed after, I think, Photoshop CS or 2015 or something like that, which allowed me to make adjustment layers on the fly for every layer. So the way to do that, and I'm just going to delete this, is to look at this small button here, which says create new adjustment layer. One cool thing about adjustment layers is that an adjustment layer affects the layer below it, affects the layer that's under it. So in Photoshop, now you can make like a file folder structure. So I'm just going to, create this adjustment layer and I'm going to create hue and saturation. And as you can see, a hue and saturation is created here. I can move things around. And everything below the layer is affected. So that's the cool thing, right? I can just change this, and tomorrow if I don't want to see this, I can just, hide it and it goes back to what the layer originally was. So I'm going to delete this hue saturation, and I'm going to show you how you can do other things. So we're going to open the adjustments. There's a lot for us to play with. Let's see if we want to add something like curves, right? Now you see the straight line. Now the curves allow you to adjust the lights and the darks of an image. It allows you to kind of play with the brightness and the darkness of the image. So I'm just going to, move this curve up and you can see the image got brighter, and I can move it down and you can see the image got, a little darker. So it adjusts both the colors as well as the contrast. It just makes the image look a little better, right? So I'm just going to show you what these curves look like. So you can make it very dark, you can make it very bright. If you move it up, it plays with the contrast and it makes it look either completely overexposed with a low contrast, or, I'm just going to bring it back to its center where it was, maybe even delete the curves because we don't need it. I'm going to show you some other adjustments, right? So you can play with the exposure, which allows you to make it a little more brighter. These are all similar ways to do the same thing. Photoshop is a tool where, you can have the same visual output in 10 different techniques, in 10 or 15 different methods, right? So choose the method that works the best, that's the fastest, the one that you're most comfortable with, right? You don't have to do something that's very fancy or very complicated. So we've already seen hue and saturation. I'll show you a photo filter. So you can have a photo filter. I'm going to choose, a cooling filter. Here are the properties. I'm just going to increase the density. And as you can see, it added a nice Instagram-like filter to what I have. It just, makes things a little nicer. Some cameras, when you shoot photos, they make the image too blue or too yellow, and this photo filter allows you to reset it back to white by using the opposing color. So yellow on one side and blue on the other side when it comes to photo filters. I'm just going to delete this, right? And you can play with all of this. And I think one of the coolest things that you can do, and this is just, pro tip, is you can click on gradient map. A gradient map is really cool because it's like a lookup table, right? It's like you convert all the colors into what's available on the gradient. And then what you can do, because we have the opacity function, we can drop the opacity so we can make it look, nice, right? So that's it for filters. We've learned a little bit on, how to make color corrections and how to make adjustments. And adjustment layers allows you to chain layers below it. So what if we wanted to adjust only the bike? What if we wanted to avoid the background and only adjust the bike? Let's try that, right? I'm going to make a very crude selection. I'm not going to do it in the most accurate way. Let's just take out the bike. I don't like using the magic wand tool. I'll show you a much cooler and more accurate technique later. For now, I'm just trying to get my point across. Okay, we've got this. Now what you can do is I'm going to Command C and Command V, right? So I've pulled out only the bike, right? I don't want the background to be affected. Now what I can do is I can actually, instead of me creating an adjustment layer, right? Here's what will happen if I create an adjustment layer, right? Let's say I want to do hue and saturation, right? This is still affecting everything because the adjustment layer affects everything below it, every layer below it, not just a particular layer. So one of the ways to make an adjustment layer affect only the layer below it and not all layers is to click this little button here. You see this button here? This adjustment layer affects all layers below. Click to clip layer. So I'm going to clip it, right? And bang. I've clipped this layer such that you see this symbol here? It means that this layer is clipped only to this layer. So you have a single adjustment. So you can still play with this, right? And the adjustment layer will follow it instead of being all over the place. So this is a cool kind of technique to make sure an adjustment layer only affects one layer below it or a few layers because you can clip the adjustment layer to a particular layer. So what have we learned today? We've learned how to do adjustment layers. If we unclip it, this affects the entire thing. We've learned to, do different kinds of color correction. We've learned how to do curves. We've learned how to, kind of use the gradient map. We've learned how to use the opacity to play with things. So we've learned some fun things. Play around with it. In the next episode, we're going to learn something awesome.